Welcome, everyone, to the Clocking Out podcast. It's a show about people who share their own personal journey that include making bold choices to clock out of situations to follow their dreams of career fulfillment and to live their best, their most authentic lives. I am your host, Raymond Lee, and this podcast couldn't be possible without the support of Career Minds. Today, I am incredibly delighted to welcome Ron Braver to the show. Ron is from the suburbs of Chicago, where he grew up. And as a kid, he loved James Bond, and he had dreams of pursuing investigative work. He obtained a bachelor's degree in accounting and later a master's degree from DePaul University in taxation. After graduating college, he was hired by the federal government as a special agent in the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation, where he served for 25 years before transitioning to the private sector. After retiring from the IRS, Ron worked in the private sector for a major accounting firm before going off on his own and starting his own business. His experience spans 40 years of investigating money laundering, asset forfeiture, public corruption, bribery, wire fraud, Ponzi schemes, and sophisticated organized crime and drug conspiracies. In this episode, Ron shares his amazing journey from the public sector to the private, and he offers some tips on how to make a successful transition. So without further ado, please enjoy Ron Braver and his Clocking Out story. Hey, Ron, welcome to the podcast. It's great to see you, my friend.
Same to you, Raymond. It's nice to be here.
Yeah, it's great. I appreciate you carving out some time here. I know you're super busy. I've been looking forward to this conversation for quite a while. For context for people who are listening, I posted a post on LinkedIn looking for someone who spent some of their career working in the federal government and then transitioned to the private sector and is now working in the private sector. And you came highly recommended as someone who has spent a good portion of your career in the government and then transition into the private sector and has been working there now for a couple of decades. So really excited to have this conversation today.
Sure. I'm looking forward to it as well. I try to help those that are trying to transition, and this is just another opportunity to do so.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So one thing that I love to start with is a good origin story. Our listeners like to get a sense of the human side of the guests that come on our show. And I'm just curious, where did you grow up and what did your parents do for a living?
Sure. So I grew up in the north suburbs of Chicago. My dad worked, he was a salesman, and my mom was a stay-at-home mom.
Did you have any siblings?
I have a sister and who still lives in the Chicago area.
Mm. So what was the earliest memorable moment you had growing up as a kid in your family?
When we were really young, when I was really young, like before kindergarten, we lived with my grandparents for like a year or two, which was kind of fun. And then before we moved to our own house, so I kind of remember that, living with my grandfather and my grandma.
That's nice.
Yeah.
So when you were young, Ron, what did you dream to be when you grew up? Like, what did you want to be?
When I was really young, I always wanted to play football. So it was football and something interesting. I liked the James Bond movies and things of that nature. So I liked, that kind of thing that would interest me.
Yeah. So when you were young, did your parents, like your mom and dad, have an influence about like what you were going to be? Like, did they say, hey, we want you to be a doctor or a lawyer? Or did you have influence from your parents on your career?
Not really. They were busy, making a living, and there was no real discussion about, they always wanted you to be a doctor or a lawyer or an accountant or something that was, legitimate, something that you would enjoy doing the rest of your life. So it was more about that than any specific thing. So.
So when did you hone in on exactly what you were going to be? Like when you went off to college, When did you
So
really hone in on what you were going to major in?
I got a college scholarship and for football. And when I got to college, I was good at math and I was good at economics, and I just decided I'm going to become an accounting major.
Mm,
And I went through the process, and once you focus on something, you accomplish, at least in my part. I focused on accounting and got my accounting degree, and that's how I ended up in accounting.
mm. So you played football all through college. So you were on a scholarship?
I was, but I played 1 year. I got hurt after my first year, so that kind of fell by the wayside. So, but I focused on school at that point and
Mm,
finished with a Bachelor of Science in Accounting
nice.
degree.
What position did you play?
I played nose guard. Yeah.
Mm.
I was on the defense.
You mind
It was
sharing about your injury?
that was a knee injury, and when you get to the college level, if you're not a certain size, I was not big enough to play. I mean, I think I was, but it just didn't work out. So even though I had a full scholarship, it probably fell by its wayside after that first year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it
Our-
sounds like you were able to hone in on your degree. You finished in accounting. Was your heart to be an accountant, to join an accounting firm?
I don't know if I could just sit at a desk all day.
Mm,
And I was more so I got into what the martial arts, and it was kind of the yin and yang of life, where you know there's an art to something and a science to something. So I was looking something that would mix art and science. So that's how I ended up in law enforcement and applying it for various federal law enforcement positions. And I became an IRS special agent. Because of my age, I was 22 years old. FBI, you had to be at least 24, and applied for a bunch of others. But the first one that called me was IRS, and I was in the Criminal Investigation Division of IRS, and really enjoyed it.
mm. So it sounds like when you were early on, you had this dream of being 007, and being James Bond was not going to be a reality, but you love the investigative work of trying to figure things out. So you got your accounting degree, and this must have been like the holy grail of jobs, right? Like you're going to be a forensics investigator with the IRS. Like that seems super cool.
Yeah, I was hired in the Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force. There was an initiative at the time. It was 1985. Filled up, the drug task force, and that's where I was hired, and was working with DEA and ATF at that time. So and I still had that dream about becoming a CIA agent or something like that. And but I got married, and that kind of took, that was the fork in my road where I just stayed as a federal. I really liked what I was doing, so it wasn't a big fork.
Hmm. So when you started working in the IRS, what were some of your biggest learnings related to the career? Like in terms of starting in that as your career, you're now working for the federal government, you're in one of the biggest agencies within the government,
Right.
and you're doing the work that you love to do. Like, what did you learn about that entire process that is memorable?
So the first part is they send you to training, and it's pretty detailed training in Glencoe, Georgia, at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, where your first class is with a bunch of different agencies, and then that's the first 6 to 8 weeks, and then the last 4.5 months is with your agency, trying to teach you how to write a report, how to interview, how to investigate, how to do search warrants, seizure warrants, arrest warrants, how to shoot a gun, how to uh, drive a car, things of that nature, that were really interesting, like learning how to interview, and
Hmm.
how to learn to extract information from a witness, how to get information appropriately. And so it was that kind of learning. It was something that you had to develop over time. You really don't become a very good agent, even though you think you are, till you're like 8 or 10 years into it. But it's a learning process that takes a long time to be really, really good. Even though you're successful, to really understand it. And I'm still learning. It's 40 years for me now.
Mm. So it sounds like that experience that you get comes with lots of cases, interviewing lots of individuals, and I bet each time, each interview is a building block for you to craft that skill to be able to extract the right kind of information. That's almost like a science to some degree, I would imagine.
It's an art and a science. It's developing a skill. At first, you think you could bully your way through things by, threatening, and threats never work. It's becoming friendly with the witness and learning how to, develop that person and get the information. And so that's what intrigued me about the job. We work not just criminal tax charges, but we work, large fraud, financial fraud type investigations. I worked drug task force. I worked organized crime. I had a couple of terrorist cases. I've had, various investigations throughout my 25 years. I ended up with, and then I ended up as a supervisor. I did a couple of stints as a on-the-job instructor. So there's if you really enjoy the job, it goes very fast.
I wonder if there's it sounds like it could be very intense as well. Did you ever have any near-death experiences where it was really kind of dicey? It just seems super intense, and the people that you're interacting with, if they have something to hide, I would imagine that as you're exposing it, the level of risk that you could be facing could be a little scary.
Yeah, no, I've worked some very bad individuals. I've been threatened, and I've made arrests that the person had a gun on them. So, you don't look at it at that time. You think you're invisible. You're young. So, but it was fun. And, really, federal law enforcement, we're a team. We always try to go out with more people than needed so people are safe.
Yeah.
And we try to control the situation.
Yeah, and that's super interesting. So, Ron, when you started working in the IRS, did you, at an early age, think that you were going to spend your entire career working for the federal government, or did you see yourself potentially transitioning into the private sector?
I did not. I always try to better myself. So I went back while I was working and got my master's in taxation from DePaul University. So I did that, but I just enjoyed what I was doing, and it seemed like from there, from the organized crime drug enforcement task force, I went in the early 90s. There was failed banks and savings and loans, and that resulted in cases that there was a case for one of the witnesses in that, or one of the defendants became a witness in other cases that led to Operation Silver Shovel, which was a political corruption case. We arrested over 20 politicians in Chicago.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it just as you're going, it just keeps there's so much work, unfortunately.
Wow. It sounds like the time went really fast, but the work was always challenging, and it always kept things interesting for you.
Yeah, for me, I never got to the bottom of my desk. There was always more. So people were either develop my own cases, or the U.S. attorney. We worked closely with the U.S. attorney's office. They were providing us work.
Is it common for employees in the government to switch agencies or departments?
Yes, it is. In fact, you could transfer, like a bunch of our agents transferred at alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, or DEA, or FBI at times. So there's movement within the organization. Some people weren't comfortable about carrying a gun or whatever, so they went back to the civil side of IRS. or they found another job within the government, or they went to the private sector. So it's not uncommon, and it happens all the time.
So when you say the civil side of the IRS, is that someone who's sitting in an office looking at spreadsheets and looking at tax returns and things like that, but you're out in the field, criminal investigation, you're carrying a gun, and you're, sort of the role of your job is much more in the field versus in the office?
Yeah, like if you're in the civil side, you're doing an audit of an individual, and you're requesting records, and they're providing you records. When you're a criminal investigator, you're going out and actively investigating, either with a summons or a subpoena, or going out and interviewing somebody, or gathering records, and trying to figure out whether the allegations against an individual or a company is accurate. So, so that investigation can take you everywhere. I've been to Kuwait, I've been to India, to Canada. So the investigation can take you more than just your locality.
Right.
I did arrest warrants in Miami and in Beverly Hills, California. I did a seizure warrant there. So, I mean, it's just the allegation and improving up your allegation can take you almost anywhere.
Wow. So 25 years, you started in your early 20s. You said you were eligible to retire in your mid 40s. When did you sort of decide, like at what point in your career did you decide that you were going to retire, and then you started thinking about the private sector as an option?
There was other agents that had left and went to the private sector and were very successful. And so I talked to them and got a feel for how they did it. And then I started doing the same thing. I was at the end of my career, 47, I was 47. I started like 9 months before. Actually, I started probably a little before that, because I got my certified fraud examiner. So I got my certification, so that which you don't really need when you're a government agent, but on the outside, it helps you look more polished. So, so I got my CPA license and things of that nature. So to get that part of my background to look better, and then I worked on my resume. And then I also met with some of the former assistant U.S. attorneys, some of the former agents that left. Started talking to them. How did you transition? It's important to understand and investigate it, just like you're investigating anything, that you learn about what you're about to jump into. I had 2 kids in college, so I wanted to make sure that I had sufficient income that would be coming in to meet that requirement. So,
yeah.
So I started looking within 9 months, started interviewing with various accounting firms and private sector consulting firms. And I liked this one firm and got hired on with Grant Thornton, which is an international accounting firm, in their forensic accounting practice. So I was doing the same kind of work, but for the private sector. And I had that job lined up. So I retired on like a Thursday or Friday and started working on a Monday. It was like no difference. So, but,
You didn't even take a vacation.
yeah, I'm just not that type. So, yeah. But it was kind of fun. And it was a good transition. And I learned a lot.
That's great.
There's different ways they prepare their reports, and just like anything, you figure it out. And I've been in the private sector now for 15 years. So,
wow. So Ron, if I can go back for a second, I wrote down success and the how. You mentioned that you saw that there were other employees who'd made the transition successfully, and you learned how they did it. Like beyond, it sounded like some networking with people that were in the private sector. It sounds like you identified some key certificates or certifications. Were there other things that they did that you sort of picked up as a tip that you that you did is in terms of that helped you with making that transition to the private sector smoother?
Um, yeah, no, I just, I looked at the successful people that left. There's all different kinds of agents. There's some that are, top 10%, then there's the middle agents, and then there's the bottom agents. So I just talked to the ones that I respected,
Mm,
and I felt like I was in that realm. So, and I was confident in my skills. So, I, it made it simpler for me. And based on the feedback I was getting from some of the former assistant U.S. attorneys and defense attorneys that I worked with, that I would do just fine. So,
mm,
and it has worked out. I mean, if you like what you're doing and you make the effort of trying to better yourself, you're going to do great.
yeah.
Some people don't go into the private sector; they go and become a contractor for the government. I wanted to do something a little different. There's a lot of my friends are contractors for DEA, FBI, uh, ATF, and various other agencies. So,
Mm.
um, but I wanted to try this first, and it just worked out.
I appreciate you sharing that. I know that when you transitioned to Grant Thornton, you worked there for a while, and then you kind of pivoted and went off on your own at some point. I just
Yeah.
wonder, like, when did you decide that you were going to start your own sort of consulting firm and just leave, quote unquote, corporate altogether and just kind of get out of that corporate environment and sort of be your own boss? What was the inspiration there?
Well, I was bringing in my own work, meaning I wasn't relying on the firm to give me work. I was
Hmm.
bringing in my own clients. And some of those clients, I was getting what are conflicts, meaning that they wanted me to, the attorney that was trying to hire me wanted me to work on something that person might be a customer of or a client of our firm, our accounting firm. So, I ran into a lot of conflicts and the, you know, so I figured out that what the amount that I was bringing in would be more than sufficient to allow me to go off on my own and actually do a lot better financially
Mm.
than when I was there and had conflict. So conflicts just meaning that that you can't work on a case that is against a client. So that's why that was my decision. And again, I'm more entrepreneurial, so for me it was an easy transition.
Yeah, so it sounds like you evaluated your situation, and I can only imagine you're working for a big company, they have cases, and you're assigned to those cases, and as an employee, you're getting paid a salary,
But
and there's limitations on the cases because of conflicts of what you could actually work on. But you figured out I can go on my own and get 100% of whatever the engagement is. And I'm getting paid as an individual plus whatever fees that are marked up as part of the engagement. And so you took the leap of faith and you got out of that and started your own consulting firm. And was there any anxiety you had in terms of like, okay, when those two first projects go away, like you knew you had projects, but when you're an independent, you're always having to think about like, what's the next project going to be? And I just wonder if there was ever moments where you felt like the stability of the firm outweighs the risk of knowing when that next opportunity is.
it just seemed like for me, and maybe I'm just lucky, but it just seemed for me, I was always so busy that I didn't have time to worry. And the worry part was, um, you know, am I, I can't take a vacation. I'm working on my vacation, that kind of thing. So,
Mm.
so for me, there's always deadlines, and to me, that was more refresh. I kind of like that, but the 10 years went really fast because of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. So the stress that you had was more around having work-life balance and not feeling like you're working too much because, it sounds like you were doing great work. You were a sought after investigator,
Right,
and your phone wouldn't stop ringing. And so your challenge was not so much, it was probably like, how do I say no?
right. And and I never said no, but at least most of the time. So um, you know, I so it just happened, and maybe I missed out on a lot of things, but I enjoyed what I was doing.
So when you reflect back of your career, what did you like? What are the pros and cons of working in the public sector versus the private? Like, are there
Yeah.
clear, distinct benefits or pros that when you look back, that people could relate to, or advice on whether you should go government versus private? And what are some things to consider?
So for me, I mean, what I've noticed or what I saw is that you get great training in the government. I mean, we had probably, at least in law enforcement, the training that we received um, was so far superior um, to what I've seen in the private sector. So private sector, it seems like they're learning by working with the partner.
Mm.
In the public sector, you're the partner from day one, and it's your case, and you have managers and supervisors and review staff, but um, you're learning quickly because you're in there and you're doing the work.
I want to ask if you have advice. So now bringing it to sort of present day, you spent half your career, 25 years working in the government, the other, 20-ish or so now private sector, both in firms. You've worked on your own, having your own consulting firm for 10 years. So for people who now are sort of in this place where, they have some uncertainty, they're in a government role, it could be anywhere. And, maybe they're mid-career and they had their sights set to hit the 25-year mark and hopefully retire with some decision to make. But, because of uncertainty, they're sort of reevaluating their situation. They may not have lost their job, but they could be sitting there in front of their computer and they're contemplating whether I need to make a change. And it sounds like for you, 9 months was the mark before that 25-year mark. There is some planning that you have to do. Like you can't just say, okay, I'm going to start throwing my application out. And so I guess, and do you have advice or any other thoughts of people who are contemplating doing what you did if they're thinking about that today?
The first thing I would do is get your resume together and start looking at it and then compare it to other resumes that are out there in the same field that you were thinking about pursuing, and seeing how you stack up and seeing if you could better yourself in the current time so that you could, you know, meet your goals. So you look at it in that way. For me, I always try to better myself. Sometimes a lot of people have side things going on. They have problems at home. They have, you got to weigh all that and focus and see what is right. It's not everybody is goal oriented or wants to be the CEO of a company. So you got to figure out in your head what is where you want to be in life. Are you fine being middle class or upper middle class, or where do you want to be? Where do you see yourself, and how do you want to get there? And if you work hard, you can get higher. I started lower, so I had to work hard to get higher. But it's just it all depends on the person. So
Yeah, no, I can appreciate that. But you said something that I really appreciated. And so you said, look at your resume as it is today as a government employee, and then compare that to the resume of someone who's doing similar work in the private sector. And I loved how you said, just do the simple comparison, because there's two things that you called out earlier that make a ton of sense. It's what are the gaps? So what are the skill gaps that you're lacking that are requirements? So it could be those certifications. And then what are other experiences that you need that are being required in that private sector? And I love that sort of comparison because a resume for a government worker is very different than what it is for a private worker. And I think that's such great advice because it's the easiest way to figure out where the difference is. So like if you're in that position today, making that comparison of where you are, where you want to be, where are the gaps, and then speaking to those individuals who are in those roles, I think is fantastic advice.
No, and I think it's common sense, and just use common sense. Just, where do you, it's a scary situation when you leave, but you got to believe in yourself and figure it out. And the private sector is rough. I mean, people don't always make it. So make sure you do when you get there, don't cause, just be there to learn and grow and adapt and you'll do fine. We've had some people that came to our firm and they don't always do so. So they come in with a certain attitude and then they don't always work out because of that. So
we were talking about the technical skill, which that technical skill is one component, but then really how your attitudes, your personality style, like how that connects with the company, like having that alignment, I think is also really important. I think doing informational interviews is something that people should do, right? Like if you're in a job right now, you're working in the federal government, you're feeling some uncertainty, and you're thinking about maybe making a change, whether it's internal or in the private sector, before you even start updating your resume, applying to jobs, let's say, for example, you're working in the IRS and you're thinking about working in a private sector accounting firm, do some informational interviews with people that you know. You're not asking them for a job, but you're asking them questions like, what do you like about your job? What is your typical day in a life in your job look like? What are the pros? What are the cons? Like get information, and then that'll really start to shape how you think about whether or not it would be the right kind of environment, because you may want something that has much more structure, or you're maybe looking for something that's more entrepreneurial. And so I do think informational interviews is a great way for you to get that information that you need.
Great.
Yeah.
But it's a scary time and a scary situation, but you could look at the good side is that it's invigorating as well. It's going to make you go outside your comfort zone. So it's important to be that once in a while.
Yeah, you definitely stretched outside of your comfort zone for sure.
Yeah. Kind of scary, but yeah.
No, but you look back and I'm sure you have no regrets.
I don't. I enjoyed my career. So I hope everybody, your kids do the same.
Yeah. Well, and they're looking up to you. Your kids see the career path that you've chosen, the loyalty that you give an institution, like the government, but then the willingness to pivot. You try new things, you switch careers, you go on your own. I think those kinds of things that, I was just thinking back around, like you were just describing your parents growing up, like your dad, you said he was in sales, your mom was a stay-at-home mom. Like, would your parents have ever scripted the career path that you've taken today?
They would not have. They just, I just don't think and you talk to a lot of other people, and it just happens. You hear people that their kids follow in their dad's footsteps, like a doctor, or a lawyer, or accountant. But it all depends on the person, right? So you have to want to do what you want to do. And if you don't, you hear people like they're artists, but they get stuck in a certain type of job, but they can still do art on the side. So
Yeah. So what's your hobby today outside of the work? Like you love the work, but
yeah,
it sounds like you play golf. Are there other things that you do that keep your mind sort of connected, sharp?
yeah. I play pickleball as well, and golf, and I hike and swim, and I just mix it up. Some of it's stress relief, but I do like the golf and the pickleball is something that you can work on, to better, get better at over time. So it'd be something you could work on when you finally retire.
Yeah.
And
Well, it sounds
fill the
like
hole.
you're starting to live that today, and that's
Yeah,
yeah, kudos to you. It's
yeah,
fantastic.
yeah. I'm lucky. So
Well, you worked really hard too. I always like to think, Ron, that if you work really hard, there's like this love and luck sort of connection. If you
yeah,
love the work that you do and you work really hard, luck follows it. I think sometimes people they want luck to find the love. And I think in your journey, in your career, you always followed what is going to make you happy and what is the work that you would fall in love with. And that's what you did. And then as you do that and you get really good at it, well, then the universe, things align and lady luck shows up from time to time. And
right.
people are
Yeah,
like, oh, Ron, you're so lucky. And you're like,
it's true.
yeah, but I work really hard. And then luck seems to find me.
Yeah, no, it's true. You make good friends on the way, so it's kind of fun.
Absolutely. Well, Ron,
But
I
yeah,
I absolutely loved our conversation today.
I,
I really enjoyed just getting to know you, your story, where you're from, and the path
yeah.
that you took to get to where you are today. I really appreciate you sharing.
Thank you. I hope everybody finds their path. It's important.
Yeah, there's a path for everyone.
Right.
Well, thanks for sharing your path with us. And I will share your contact information in our notes, so if people want to connect with you on LinkedIn, they can do that. And again, just really appreciate you carving some time out today.
Thanks, Raymond.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
And thanks everyone for listening. Until next time. Hello, Raymond again here. Thank you again to our sponsor, Career Minds, a global provider of outplacement and career development services. And if you'd like to connect with me about your own personal career journey, you can connect with me on LinkedIn as well as find me on Instagram at raymondlee.co. Until next time, remember, if you're stuck or unsure of your career or future and you think it's time for a change, ask yourself these 3 questions. Does my career or work make me feel alive? Am I doing the things that matter to me most? And am I creating value for myself and for others? Until next time.